I'll begin this afternoon session with a brief introduction. Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Young, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Thursday, November 28th, 2024, and this is the third session in the e-lecture series entitled Inspiring Community Action, Connection, and Stewardship. How can civic involvement support Canadian urban forests? The series is brought to you by Tree Canada. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate with Dr. Adrina Bardakjian and the team at Tree Canada to host these webinars. Today's webinar is titled Supporting Canada's Urban Forests Through Mapping and Fostering Community Stewardship. A special reminder that the ISA certified arborists are eligible to receive one continuing education unit for this webinar. Please email electures@cififc.org with your full name and ISA certified ID in order to obtain the ISA continuing education unit. Once we verify your attendance, we'll send your information to ISA for them to process. Today, we have Dr. Adrina Bardakjian, Director of Research and Engagement from Tree Canada, to introduce today's e-lecture speaker. With that, I will now pass it over to Dr. Adrina Bardakjian.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the CIF for hosting this session and all our series with you. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Danijela Puric-Mladenovic. Danijela is a longtime colleague and friend. She's an assistant professor at the Institute of Forestry and Conservation within the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto. She has a BSc and a Bachelor's in Science and a Master's in Science in Forestry from the University of Belgrade in Serbia, and a PhD from the Faculty of Forestry at U of T. Danijela's expertise lies in applied science and research in spatial conservation planning, natural heritage, urban forestry, and vegetation monitoring in settled areas. Her research focuses on developing practical solutions and tools to support strategic conservation, restoration, and integrated spatial planning in urban and peri-urban environments. Additionally, Danijela founded the Vegetation Sampling Protocol, led research on strategic multi-purpose forest monitoring, and co-leads community-based forest stewardship based on neighborhoods protocols. She actively collaborates with diverse community groups, NGOs, and various levels of government. She's a member of Tree Canada's Canadian Urban Forest Network National Steering Committee and a member of the Board of Directors for the Forest Gene Conservation Association. Danijela, thank you for being with us today and sharing your work. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's my pleasure to be again with Tree Canada and Canadian Forest Service. As mentioned, I'll talk today about stewardship within urban forest, and for the quick outline of the presentation, just as a reminder, a little bit about Canadian urban areas, urban forest, getting to what's stewardship. Then I'll cover municipal urban forestry and urban forest stewardship, the way how we perceive it, and with a few examples of stewardship, but by no means the only examples. It's well known to all of us that Canada despite its size, it's one of the most urbanized countries in the world. Most of our population lives in urban areas, and the extent of the urban areas, it's quite large, as well as the density of population per square kilometer. As you can see, certain pockets are more red than the others, which is no surprise. The urban forest is distributed across different land uses in urban areas, and often that's one of the main drivers how we manage, how we conserve urban forest, and how we in fact understand it. So when we look at the Canada, this was based on all municipalities, 3,000. and more people. What land use type is the most predominant, and open areas and natural areas along with residential areas make about 70% of urban land use. Streets and roads make 11%. But just as a reminder, that's where most of our management resources go to manage, not probably more than 20% of the urban land base. And this is why it's really critical to talk about those other ways how we manage the land and what's happening in these other areas. And before I start with the specifics related to this talk, just as a reminder about when the term and the idea of stewardship came about, and definitely one of the pioneer was Aldo Leopold, when he said, and when we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. And this probably prompted many of the stewardship activities, and not just stewardship, but also conservation activities in the past and this century. And then when we think about stewardship, the term it's a really broad ranging. Stewardship could be done as a way of leading one organization that has nothing to do, let's say, with ecosystem, but also could be stewardship of managing stewardship of wildlife, of water courses, and so on. And the broad definition, in fact, it's out there. It is very hard to nail down which one is the perfect one. That it's fairly useful to urban areas, that it's action-oriented framework, and it includes ecology and also social side. But also that the responsible use and protection of the natural environment, and conservation and sustainable practices. In Ontario, we used to have a stewardship network led at the time by the Ministry of Natural Resources, and that was one of the prime examples how stewardship could work. Their definition is land stewardship means caring for our land, air, and water, and sustaining the natural processes on which life depends. So when we look the urban areas, then yes, urban forest is distributed across streets, residential areas, across different land uses, and we have to ask ourselves, so who is looking after the urban forest? And again, it's no surprise that municipalities are looking at the urban forest, and that's mainly often that portion of street trees and the minor portion, in fact. Then we have many community groups in residential area, NGOs, resident associations, institutions like university and schools are looking after their trees, and there are obviously some tree companies and businesses. So that implies that, in fact, urban forest, it's stewarded by many different groups out there. And we often think about the municipal group only. So a couple of years ago with Tree Canada and Adrena, we started a project called Municipal Urban Forestry Footprint in Canada. And that's the one that we will talk about how municipalities in a general sense, managing their forest, what is the extent of municipalities that have any activities related to urban forestry. Then we will move on the second block, which talks about urban forest stewardship more from the community perspective and NGO. And again, that project, it's also was done in collaboration with Tree Canada and in addition with Canadian Forest Service. And then as someone who is in this field and touches on stewardship, I'll just touch how we, from the research side, make connection with stewardship. So the first part, we will talk about what's the extent of urban forest of forestry footprint in Canada. We know that as after Dutch elm disease and the loss that has happened, urban forestry has grown in Canada exponentially, in particularly after the 2000. And urban forestry is still evolving and expanding over time and space. It has been practiced by different intensity across small towns, larger municipalities. Urban forestry activities have been embedded in various municipal departments. It's not necessarily all the time they're practiced within urban or forestry department for that matter. They've been practiced under different names, and that was one of our objectives, to see what's going on across Canada. Many municipalities in Canada, as we said, have urban forestry and associated policies, bylaws, different management and stewardship strategies, but they are often, for the lack of a better word, hidden under this. They might be hidden under different disciplines and municipal activities. So for us, that was a discovery to see what's going on across Canada, knowing from experience that there must be more than what we see. So one of the main objectives was to determine the intensity and extent of urban forestry activities, capture different terms related to urban forestry activities, and if possible, and we managed to do it, map that distribution across the landscape. So we looked at every municipality that is 3,000 people and more, and check for if they have anything related to urban forestry. And the term that was used, it wasn't only urban forestry, it was anything related to parks, maybe horticulture, tree management, and so on. So based on that, we can see that, and again, it's no surprise that the Quebec, Ontario, and BC are at the top. They have most municipalities with some type of urban forestry activities, and that's definitely related to the density of population and the size. When we look what are those departments that are managing and stewardship urban forest mainly on the public lands across Canada? That's mainly Parks Department, sometimes Recreation, sometimes Parks and Recreation, to some degree about 60 Forestry Department, and often Environmental Services Department. The way how we did this research and the mapping, we can easily look what's going on at the specific province. And of course, here I have to be biased to my own province. So I just pulled a summary for Ontario. And what's interesting for Ontario, that Ontario, in fact, has quite a bit of forestry department that are managing urban forests, but still quite a bit of urban forestry. It's under the umbrella of Public Works Department and Parks and Recreation departments. There are some horticultural, but that's a minor component. The other thing that we looked at was who is the manager of the department that is looking after urban trees, and what are those positions. So it's great to know that typically most of them are urban forestry position, that many of them are registered forested, but there are some certified arborists as well, parks operation managers, and even some horticulturalists. then we can go and look at the 3 bylaws, and we'll look at the policy and not just 3 bylaws, but just for the sake of presentation, this slide and the map show where we have private 3 bylaws across across Canada. And there are many other bylaws that are specific to provinces or to specific issue that it's for the certain region of Canada. Of course, tree inventories are always the one that everyone is interested in, and municipalities that have tree inventories, what we learn, most of them are street tree related inventories. In some cases, there will be park inventories, so not necessarily inventory of the entire urban forest, though municipalities have urban canopy mapping. And this is going back to what we were previously saying, that 11% of the land that it's made of streets, in fact, gets the most attention in terms of urban forestry. Which makes room for all those other stewardship activities that we will talk in the next slides. As an example, when we look at the footprint of urban forestry in Canada, what came that many municipalities have some activities related to pest and disease control. And to some degree, that's no surprise that the cluster of those activities in Eastern Ontario, in Eastern Canada, sorry, because of the emerald ash borer and more elm-related activities in prairies. Then the other work that we've been doing, looking at what are those other stewardship activities? Who else is looking after urban forest? And for this part of our work, we find that the definition given by Bennett that describe stewardship as action taken by individuals, groups, or network of actors with various motivations and level of capacity to protect, care for environment, in this case, urban forest, which are often done on a voluntary basis. This definition fits well our second part of stewardship projects, where we look at, okay, what are those groups out there that are working on across these different lands, recognizing that and knowing, in fact, that there are many of them, but and often in day-to-day we come across to them, we work with many of them, but what they do and how many of them, that's unknown. This specific project, it was done as a pilot for using Toronto as a study area. Toronto was selected because it's the largest city, but also we knew that there are lots of stewardship activities. The original idea for the project came from Adrina and Verna Crossman from Canadian Forest Service, and I was keen to jump in and help with like all sorts of database, number crunching, and also curious about these questions to understand who is doing what are the other actors that we have on the landscape, what they do. And from my own curiosity was a question, is there a room for stewardship coordination and more strategic stewardship efforts? And of course, that's way bigger than that what one person can do, but probably from personal interest and working with many groups, this question in particularly is interesting. Are we duplicating our efforts, or maybe we can find a way to pull our resources and get more for the buck. So this project started two years ago. It was supported by Canadian Forest Service supported data collection, and we managed to collect quite a bit of data for Toronto. Data was collected in a standardized way where we looked mainly what was publicly available, web pages and social media. We didn't do any interviews because it is very time consuming to do that. And based on that effort, we created a database of over 1,000 stewardship groups. However, many of these groups are not, let's say, directly urban forestry groups. They will not have that in their name, or maybe urban forestry will be just as one of component of their work. They might be engaged in other environmental issues. These groups will include Toronto-specific local groups, but also regional and national groups working within Toronto geography. As part of this process, we also were very curious to see if we can record when those groups were established, when they started their activities. And just as an example, the oldest group that we have, it's Friends of Allen Garden, starting in late 1800s, sorry. We also seen from the data that there is a slight peak of groups mid-90s, and the majority of them, in fact, they've been established after 2000, which could be correlated or a reason, because we know that many level of government started pulling out and transferring their work to other groups. But also the other is that the public is way much more aware, thanks to all the information that it's available to internet, social media, and so on. So one thing that what we've learned through this project is that there are various groups out there, and as an example, some of these stewardship groups that we looked, their primary activity, for example, might be advocacy, stewardship advocacy. Some of them will have activity as advocacy, conservation, education. So when we plotted that, we see that majority of these stewardship activities are related to management and advocacy. Curious for me was that only about 6% of them were interested in monitoring. The other thing that we learned that it popped out that there are groups out there that they're not necessarily involved, let's say, in stewardship, but they behave as supporting partner, and that group makes about 11% of those that we collected. So, for example, when we looked at just stewardship groups that have urban forestry as a specific activity, we can see that they are spread out across groups that whose main goal is to do advocacy. Some of them do conservation, education, management, monitoring, and so on. This being said, data enable us to tease apart what's happening there, and in this case, and then example, how urban forest stewardship it's spread across the city of Toronto. So, for example, there are biodiversity as one of the biodiversity protection is one of the specific stewardship activities. It's spread out again across different groups, from those that do advocacy, conservation, and in this case, what we've learned is that there is quite a lot of supporting partners for biodiversity. The climate-related activities are even more pronounced. I just don't have slides for them here. And someone may ask, so why do you bring all of these groups? You know, they are not urban forestry. They do touch on urban forestry, and potentially there is that overlap. The line, it's not always clear. So the naming doesn't mean that, let's say, that biodiversity and urban forestry are mutually exclusive. As an example, urban natural areas in Toronto, known as the Toronto Ravines, attract stewardship activities, and we looked what's going on there. That's very much place-based stewardship. People that live close to them, or people that use them. And we looked, okay, so who is directly or indirectly engaged in managing Toronto Ravines? So there are community organizations, there are nonprofit organizations and groups. Also, some schools are engaged in some level of stewardship in Toronto Ravines. For example, there are many groups like Friends of the Dawn, Friends of the specifics ravine or area in Toronto, and the list shown here is by no means the final list. These are just some that portion of the Toronto Ravine having a group that looks after them. The other thing that stood up is that people love tree planting, and many groups are engaged in tree planting, and as one of the stewardship activity, which was no surprise for us. But what we learned, that not everyone is planting trees. Again, there are 93 advocacy group. So for example, it may happen that a certain stewardship group, it does advocacy for tree planting and it does tree planting. But there are groups that, let's say, if there are the groups that have the main objective climate, they might just do advocacy for tree planting. Then when we looked what type of tree planting activities, where they are happening, that was also interesting to see that they're happening in private lands, that there are corporate tree planting, highway tree planting, natural areas, lots of tree planting in school, on public properties, and so on. And we managed to collect also, to some degree, how many trees were planted, but we haven't crunched those numbers yet. The other one that was also interesting to me was looking at, we have lots of Toronto garden clubs. There are almost 25, 26 of them, very active groups. As I mentioned, one, in fact, the oldest stewardship group, it's one of the garden clubs. And yes, there is overlap between urban forest and what these groups do. So through this work, what became obvious, that the stewardship has many shades, many shapes, and that one organization could do several activities. That there are small organization, obviously the big one, but lots of community groups that are just groups, and they don't even have a web page. And James, who is doing PhD with us here in forestry, look at the social media to pull out the information on these. Advocacy, it's very important one. We try to pull that one from looking at the groups, but one thing that often it's overseen it's that many groups get active once when we have an issue, and they mobilize by that. As everyone knows, we don't lack all of these because there is definitely we know that there is lots of pressure on forests, and these groups sometimes they are successful and sometimes they're not, but often tree loss will mobilize people and in fact be a catalyst for creating a group that manages their trees. And one of such was a long branch, which I will touch on later on, a community that didn't have any group doing anything with trees, but because they started losing their trees because of development, they got mobilized, and to my knowledge, they are now one of the most active neighborhoods in Toronto. So this portion of the project, looking at the stewardship in Toronto pilot project, as I said, it was done with Tree Canada, Canadian Forest Service, and us here, my lab at U of T, and we do hope that we will have a chance to continue this and expand to other cities across Canada. And one may ask where someone like myself, who is a tree hugger and would rather measure trees than get into the social side of urban forestry, would be interested in this. Not because social science, it's my field, but I find that within my research, since the day one, I was not able to do it without people and making the connection with stewardship. Maybe I just didn't realize at the time that was stewardship. So I'll just touch on some of the projects that are happening here from U of T and that are stewardship projects, beside the two that I mentioned that we are working on with Tree Canada. So we do support stewardship through science and research, and that connection goes two ways, because often community groups, municipalities, and different groups come to us, ask for knowledge, science, research support, but we also rely on them because they help us with data collection and gaining information on what's going on across the landscape. Then we support stewardship through education, something that it's not going to go on a research CV or publication, that anytime where we can help communities, where they come for knowledge, give a speech, talk to students, we use that opportunity. Working in urban landscapes, as we've seen, it's probably not that it's not easy, but you have to rely on different groups, and we've seen that through our two projects that there are many partners out there. So building partnership and trust with these different partners, it's very important to us. The other one, long-term project, and our work have been community engagement, and of course knowledge and technology transfer, not just with communities but also with municipalities. One of the first citizen science and stewardship project, in fact, was it started here at U of T, where quite a long time ago, we got engaged with different community groups, and the main objective was their education and helping them to do stewardship of their urban forest. Over time, we realized that it's more than that our program, which is neighborhoods inventory and monitoring has a management component and helps with decision making for the communities. And we took the advantage of the information collected for all sorts of research and advanced knowledge and so on. And just some examples of the most recent communities that are working with us. And I just want to recognize Dr. Andy Kenny, who has been my friend in neighborhoods crime, if I can say that, and is working successfully with communities in Ottawa, because now he lives there and I'm more active down south. And we had so many communities that it's amazing and very inspiring to see those people that really want to care about trees from southwestern Ontario, Hamilton, Elora, Toronto, Eastern Ontario. The Annex community that is just north of our campus, it's getting into monitoring their urban forest after 10 years. We went back to see what's going on, what trees are dying, has urban canopy and tree condition has changed. Look at invasive species distribution to see what's happening. And sometimes it's no surprise that we see a lot of Norway maple and of course Manitoba maple takes the advantage of the forgotten urban spaces where people don't realize that it gets self-established. And it's interesting to compare these communities to some other. The old silver maples are going down because of the age, not just in the Annex, but in other parts of Toronto. And we manage with some of that information, thanks to the community support, to see how our forest has changed, how much diameter has grown by species and the canopy over 10 years. With Long Branch that I mentioned previously, it's one of the community that got mobilized because of the development. And we've been working with Long Branch Community Association since 2018 and helping them with both inventory and monitoring. And the community has taken all of that knowledge so seriously that they are a true steward of their urban forest. They do their tree planting, pruning. They even have a tree fest every September. And this is an example where stewardship, it's not either or. It's bringing also people together, and proud to say how academia and research community could support communities. In some of these projects, they are driven by completely by volunteers. In some cases, we engage our students, and they get to learn about stewardship fairly early. So, for example, with Long Branch, our students worked, and they would organize community walks, help with the tree inventory, and even volunteer after they are done with the tree fest. And again, just different examples how the information that it's collected by the community and us could be used to support stewardship. The other group that we work with, it's Green Venture from Hamilton, very active group in that part of Ontario that they engage in inventory with us on the city lands that are subsidized property. And just the past summer, we started looking at some trees on church properties, which is another neat project. And Green Venture, it's also active in tree planting and using the tree inventory to find the best places to plant trees. The other way how engage in stewardship and support stewardship is to looking at these urban natural areas, which are a little bit more complex and more intensive to sample. But we have been successful in engaging with municipalities and some larger landowners within urban areas and supporting in terms of what's going on in these urban areas. And that's where we dive into vegetation diversity, and that's where the overlap of urban forestry and their diversity is. So to close up this with a definition that we started, that really stewardship are the action taken by individuals and groups with diverse motivations. They definitely have different capacity, and that's what we learned through, at least through our collaborative projects, that there is a way that we can help each other. But it's amazing to see all of those groups that are out there, and they try to do as best as they can to protect and conserve urban forest. Being in academia, looking at the entire landscape, there is overlap among these groups. It's not that they want to do that, but I think it's because there is no centralized knowledge who is doing what. And I think that's what we with Canada and Toronto Pilot Project, we started to think about that. Let's see who is doing what and what are the activities, and hopefully we will have a chance to develop this project further. So with that, I hope I didn't go much over my time, or at the time, not sure. I haven't checked my time. Yeah. So open for questions.
Thank you, Danijela. That was a great presentation. Before we move on to the questions, I'm going to launch a post-webinar survey. Just give me 1 sec here. Launching. So there are 2 questions in total. You may need to scroll down to see the second question. All right, Danijela, if you're ready, I have some questions for you from the Q&A.
Thank you.
So the first question is, can you please define what an urban area is? Who owns the urban area? There was another open area as well. What is that and who owns it? Any comments?
The owners are many. How to define it? It's possible. There is a project that we are just here again, my group finishing up with the Environment Canada, where we mapped urban and near urban areas. And urban areas, as an example, the city of Ottawa, it's probably the best example because it's an urban rural municipality. Not that the entire city of Ottawa political boundary, it's urban. No, it's not. So it's a definition of urban. It's based on density, road density, how many people are there. And as I said, I hope that in January we will have the map available, urban and near urban areas map for Canada. We can argue, if the boundary should be pushed like 500 meters, or maybe we should push it inside. I think that's less relevant, but that the ability to know the exact footprint, that's that's neat. Who owns it? Urban forest, everyone. Private landowner, municipality. U of T, where I sit today, has a bunch of trees. Toronto District School Board, it's one of the largest landowner in Toronto itself. little parks, parkettes, and that's where I think that Aldo Leopold definition of caring for land, once when you feel that that's your land, not someone else, then I think many things become easier in managing what we have.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. I saw that urban forestry is placed in a forestry and then public works departments. What are the others in order of popularity? The writing was difficult to see. So could you clarify that,
Yeah.
Danijela?
Yeah,
Thank
sorry
you.
about that, because those are the graphs that are coming from the map. I didn't realize how font it's tiny. So these are department. It's not a popularity context, if I may say. It's rather that we have traditional departments within the city: infrastructure, roads, recreation, parks, and then over time, as our needs to manage trees, they grow, people get hired and they get placed public works. So that's where some urban forestry end up. Some of the urban forestry, I would say, that has matured in more matured municipalities. They have their own forestry department that it's on hopefully in the equal foot as, let's say, road department. In some smaller municipalities, we came across horticulture department. So horticulture probably, manages some park and plants some flowers, but that park has trees. So these departments, yeah, they inherited, but what we notice that there is a shift that more municipalities have forestry departments.
Thank you, Danijela. Next question for you is, can you comment on what progress is being made on offering a Bachelor's of Urban Forestry degree at U of T?
So at U of T, we have a minor in forestry as part of our Master of Forest Conservation program. Students go into urban forestry, and in fact, that's the other thing that I'm going to post to see. At least 70% of our students are in once when they finish Master of Forest Conservation, they're in urban, near urban landscape. And I know that there are some departments, maybe Mississauga, maybe the city of Toronto, where we have our Master of Forest Conservation urban.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question for Danijela, was it tree used to inventory CD and forests? Any
Sorry?
comment? So the question is, was it tree used to inventory CD and forests?
I might not. Could you clarify that for me?
Sure. So Tony Elders, could you clarify your question one more time in the Q&A pod? And we're just let's move on to the next questions after he clarified the question.
Thank you.
So next question for you is, are you connected to Canada's promise to plant 1 billion trees or more? Do the federal government have access to all of the groups you identified?
I keep preaching. Not that I'm connected. I know that I made at one point in early stages was interview about 2 billion tree programs, but I'm not connected more than that I know that there is program. I know people and groups that got the funding, but not more than that.
Thank you, Danijela. So next question in the Q&A pod is, what about the work that cities are doing in their urban forestry departments? Many cities are putting funding and resources into local community stewardship groups. City work should be more recognized in terms of community stewardship and tree planting. So what's your comment on this?
So I'm assuming the question is how municipalities and cities support stewardship. And yes, some larger cities, they do support stewardship. Groups applying for funding. I know that the city of Toronto has a stewardship fund. However, this is my personal opinion. I do still think that the cities do not have stewardship coordinator, and they'll bring the old good program that Ontario government used to have. One of the best, was recognized even internationally. We used to have the Ontario government at the time used to have a stewardship council made of people that live in a certain area. And there used to be a stewardship coordinator paid by Ontario government. And the stewardship coordinator work with the council on the issues, problems that the community has. The best program ever was cut down. Never something like that came back. I know that there was proposed something similar, I believe, for the city of Ottawa in their urban management plan. I'm personally not aware that we have something like that, more strategic engagement of the municipal government with the groups. Typically, it's a funding base, or there is opportunity for funding. And as I said, some municipalities do that, but it's not necessarily that there is, to my knowledge, and I apologize if I'm wrong, that there is a strategic approach. If you have hundreds of groups, let's say in a city like Toronto, you want to make sure that you rely on that energy strategically and that you avoid overlapping resources. And I'm not sure that, we have anything like that.
Thank you, Danijela. I saw Tony just clarified his question, so I will read it out for you. U.S. Forest Service used iTree program to inventory urban forests. Was that the one you used to inventory Canadian urban forests?
No. So there are many different program. iTree, it's okay. It does provide you with a reporting tool, but it's not necessarily the way how they collect the information, that it's a management tool. So the way, at least for the communities that Andy and I've been working on for a long time, we use our own program. It's called Neighborhoods, and we can run all of our data through iTree. So we get the same benefits as iTree, with the difference that every landowner knows what trees they have. We also, as part of our program, we map potential plantable space. So it's different, and the program is designed for, if I can say, for lay people, so that the communities and volunteers can use it to do tree inventory.
Thank you, Danijela. Next question for you is, what software are you using in your mapping activities? Were these maps mostly produced with ArcGIS products?
Yes, some with the ArcGIS and some with some other free program, like QGIS. It's perfectly fine. It just takes a little time to play with the graphics.
Thank you. I think we have one more question for you in the chat. What is the most active group in Toronto?
As I said, there are many active groups, and some of them are community groups, and some of them are NGOs. The community groups are typically everything it's volunteer based, and the NGOs, there are quite few of them. Obviously, they work in a different way. So for the community groups that are more like a resident association, As far as I know, Long Branch is the most active one. I do work with them. It's just amazing what they do, and everything it's volunteering. There is no single person there that it's paid for their work. They hire our students. We help them that way with knowledge. NGOs, some very active NGOs are, as I said, as I mentioned, those in ravines. NGO active in tree planting, it's a leaf that they do planting on private lands. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind. I apologize if I missed someone.
No worries. So if there are no more questions, I would like to bring this session to a close. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar session. And once again, thank you very much to Danijela for this great presentation. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.